Hello everyone, welcome to Vswap. My name is Amit and today we are going to see JWT token with Spring Security and Spring Boot 3.2. In that video, we are going to use latest version of Spring Security and Spring Boot. Now, in last session, we have seen that internal flow of the Spring Security with form-based authentication and authorization. But there is a problem inside the form-based authentication, that basically basic authentication authorization at the database level. So what is the problem was there? So basically in that basic security, that Spring Security creates a session object for per user. Let's say 100 users logged in sometime, then it will create 100 session objects. Okay, let's say 1000 or 1 crore or 10 cr or 10 lakh users access our site by login. Then in that case, it will create this much of objects. And for enterprise or big application, it is not possible to maintain this much of session object. Okay, so that's why it is better to use JWT for big and enterprise application, because in case of JWT we are maintaining the that information of user at client side, that means at the browser side. Okay, so first let's understand the JWT token. So let's see structure of the JWT token. So here there is website. Okay, so here we can take a help of that website to encode and decode the JWT token. Okay, so let's understand the structure of the JWT. So you can see here, this is the token and it is an encrypted token basically. So this string contains some information. So what information it contains? It contains three parts. First is a header, second is a payload, and third is a signature. In case of header, we can provide some information like algorithm type, what algorithm that we use for encoding this, what are type of that token. So such kind of metadata or information should be in the header. In case of payload, we have to provide some information like expiration time or subject. Subject means, let's say, your user ID or username, like that. And in signature, we can provide information. um, Basically it's not information, it's a key, secret key. Okay, so we have to create one key, secret key, and there are some libraries. By using that, we can create that encoded secret key. That's it. Okay, and it's a random alphabets, so we can directly provide that a b c d x y z, whatever that you want. So once we provide it in the Spring Boot application, so it create this encoded, okay, this JWT token. Okay, so based on basically username, we are going to create this JWT token which contain expiry time, username, and that secret key which we provided. Now this is all about the JWT token. Now let's jump onto the code and let's see how we can secure our application with that token. So let's understand the flow of JWT based security. Okay, so when we applied that JWT security on our Spring Boot application, so in that case, we have to create one authenticate API. And first time, those who wanted to access the APIs, secured APIs, they has to call first this API slash authenticate. And as part of this API, they has to send username and password. Once they send the username and password, so that request will get intercept by the security filter chain. Basically, this is the component that we have to configure as a developer. In that component, we have to provide some configuration, for example, which API is secured or not secured. And here, this authenticate API is not secured. Anyone can call this API without authentication. If you want to more about that security filter chain and all, so please go through the previous video where I have described entire flow of the Spring Security. Basically, I have explained the internals of the Spring Security. Now the next thing is, once that security filter chain intercept that authenticate API or sorry HTTP request, then it check it is secured or not secured. But in that case, we have to configure it should be not secured. Okay, so if it is not secured, then this request will get diverted to the auth controller. So this controller we have to write as a developer. Inside this, there is a authenticate API, and we have to configure or we have to write some logic. So what kind of logic that we have to write here in authentication auth controller, let me explain you. So the first operation that we have to write here, calling authentication manager. Okay, so what is authentication manager? It's a component of the Spring Security. Basically it's a class, okay, interface which have implementation. Inside that authentication manager we have to pass that username password, okay, inside the authentication object. Basically we have to create one authentication object and we have to pass this all information toward the authentication manager. Now authentication manager have both username and password. Based on that username, authentication manager class will call to the database, and based on that username he has to get the user detail. But the authentication manager will not call directly to database. For that we have to or basically it provides one interface called as a user detail service interface, and it has one abstract method called as load by username, and we have to provide implementation to the user detail service. Inside that implementation we have to fetch the data, or we have to fetch the user object based on username. Once that user object, once we get that user object, then we have to create one user detail object in that user detail service, and we have to return that user detail service to the authentication manager. Once authentication manager get that user detail object, then that he has both the object, user detail object, and that authentication object. After this, authentication manager will call that authentication provider. So authentication provider is a interface which has multiple implementation. So in which we are going to use DAO authentication provider implementation. So if you want detail about this flow, so please go to the previous video. This that link is given into the description. So here authentication manager has that user detail object and authentication object. So after this, authentication manager will pass that both object to the authentication provider. Now authentication provider is responsible for to do the validation or do the authentication. He compare both the objects, or we can say that simply it will do the authentication because he has the user detail from the user, okay, login password from the user, okay, as part of authentication object, and he has user detail object as well, which contains actual username, password, and rule. Once that authentication is done, then it returns that authentication object toward the authentication manager by setting one flag inside the authentication manager called as authorization, and authentication is equal to true. Once that flag is set, then authentication manager return this uh, toward the authentication controller. Now authentication controller get to know, okay, that user is authenticated, okay, it is authenticated, or this request is authenticated successfully. After this, in second step, it calls to the JWT util, because right now that we get to know, or that implementation get to know okay, this username password is valid or authenticated successfully. Once it is done successful, after this, that authentication controller, or we have to write a logic inside the authentication controller to call JWT util. So what is the JWT util? Basically it's a class, and we have to write this class. Inside that class we have to write a logic. We have to write a logic to generate a token, or to encrypt it, generate a token, or generate a encrypted token, and similarly decrypt the token. Okay, so encoding and decoding and generating logic will be present inside that JWT util class. Okay, so it is responsible for to generate, encode, and decode same, or validate that token. Okay, so all this stuff which will be here, and we have to write this logic inside this class. So authentication controller will call to the JWT util, and he pass that username. He pass the username to the JWT util class, and here we will create that JWT token based on that username. After this, it will return that JWT token to the auth controller, and auth controller responsible for to return this token to the end user. Okay, so here end user will get that token. Once user will get that token, then now if user or client wants to hit any other API, then For example, let's say slash hello API. If you want to hit that API, then they has to put that token inside the headers, inside the HTTP request headers. Okay, so let's say there is a API called as slash hello. Inside the headers, they has to put that token. Now again, once we hit that slash hello API, it will get intercepted inside the filter chain. Now filter chain will check, okay, this slash hello API is a secured API. If it is secured API, then he calls another filter, okay, another filter called as a JWT filter. Here we have to write a logic for the JWT filter. Inside that logic, sorry, inside that filter, uh, there is a logic to validate the token. But for validating the token, it will call to the again JWT util, and he passed that token to the JWT util, because JWT util class has a capability to decode this and validate this. Okay, once it validates successfully, then that filter JWT filter get to know, okay, this is a valid request. So after this, it will create a security context holder, and inside this, it store that JWTA authentication object, JWT authentication object. So, and after this, it divert or it allow that HTTP request to access that slash hello API. Now the question is why that security context holder contains that JWT authentication object. Basically here that filter store that authentication object, okay, which contain user detail like a username, for example, username, roles and all. Now while uh, executing that program or executing that request, if we need that username or other detail of the user for auditing purpose or for printing purpose, okay, so for that we can use that security context object and we get the authentication object and we can get the username or email or other details. That's it. So that is the purpose of that context holder. Once that execution is done of that request, after this it remove that object from the security context. That's it. So this is the flow of JWT token security. Now let's jump onto the code. So here I have already created one Spring Boot project, and let me show you what dependency that we needed. So here we need these dependencies. What are the dependency? First is Spring Security, another is this starter web. The third one is that JJWT API, and similarly that JJWT IMPL, and then JSON web token. Okay, so these dependency that we needed to apply this security. Now the thing is about the code, so don't worry about the code. I have given that code link or GitHub link into the description, so you can use directly this code, because it's very difficult to remember the code, but yes, it's important to remember the concept. Okay, so we have the dependencies. That's it. Now the next thing is let's revise this diagram. Okay, so if you see here, we need JWT util. Okay, let me show you the diagram again. Okay, see here. So basically first let's configure that JWT util token generation, and it is responsible for to encode, decode and generate that JWT token. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. So we need one class called as a JWT token, sorry, JWT util. Okay, this is the util class, and we have to annotate it with the @component. Now the next thing is it will take a lot of time to type all the syntaxes. So to save the time, I already copied the code. Okay, so this is the code, because it will take a lot of time. So that's why I copied this code. Now the next thing is, let's go step by step. So what is the purpose of JWT util? To generate, to encode and decode the that token. Okay, so first thing is here, if you see there is something key is equal to keys dot hash keys for some random string. Okay, this is your secret key, we can say it key or secret key, and you can provide here any random string. Okay, no worries. Now based on that string, it will create a key. Okay, it will create a key, and this is a keys dot hash key for it is coming from that dependency called as a JSON W token. Okay, JSON web token. Okay, and so we don't need to worry about this. This is just a method which is responsible for to generate a key based on that random string. You can give any string that you want. Okay, so once we get the key, after this we have to write one method called as a generate token. Okay, inside generate token, uh, that authentication manager will call this generate token method and he passed the username. So let me show you it in the diagram. You can see here. Okay, you can see here, uh, that first that authentication, sorry, not authentication manager, that authentication controller will call this JWT util token. Okay, so which method he call? He call generate token method and he pass the username. Once we get the username, so you can see JWT builder. Inside builder there is a method called as set subject. So set here the name, username. Okay, after this what we have to provide here, set issued date. Okay, that means current date. Okay, so we are providing here the current date, and then second thing is set expiration time. So you can, so see that JW token should have some expiration. Okay, 1 days, 2 days, 1 year, 6 months, whatever. It's totally based on your requirement. Now here we have set 10 hours validity. Okay, so set expiration, that current date, okay, current time, plus we are adding that particular hours or particular time here. Okay, so this is the expiration, and then sign with a key. So we have that encrypted key, so paste here and then call a compact. So after this it generate a JWT token. Okay, basically it's a string, encoded string. Now it will return or the string, so in that way it will work. Now the next thing is validate token. This method is again important. So who is going to call this validate token method? Let me show you. This JWT filter will going to call this method. Which one? Validate. Okay, validate method. So we have to write this validate method, and that validate method will require token and username. Now from that token, so there is another method called as extract username that we have to write, and that extract username will call to the extract claim. Okay, so in the extract claim method, we have to like decode that, we can say that JWTs using that parse builder method and set signing key. So so see that JWT token will get decode only by using key which we provided. Okay, which we provided. So here we have to provide this key, and by using that key only, that we can get the body. Okay, we can decode this. Basically we can able to decode this token by using the key. Once we decode that key, then we are returning here extract username. So here if you see getting body, from the body, so this is body, so from this body we are getting the subjects. Subject means username, and then extract username. Okay, that username is returning, sorry, that extract username obviously returning the username, and here it is getting that username. Okay, basically it is extracting the username from the token. Once we get the username, then after this it will compare this username with the that given username by the user, and if it is valid, okay, if it is matching, then that is okay. But the next thing is expiry. So here we have to pass the token and we have to write a logic which one that expired, and here again the same thing, we have to write a logic to extract the body and then get the expiration time, and then we need to compare this expiration time. Okay, so that means basically here we are checking that token is expired or not. Okay, so let me revise. While validating the token, we are decoding that token first using the key. Okay, if it is not able to decode by using the key, that means it is invalid, it will throw an exception. If it is valid, then it is able to decode this. Once decode this, it get the username, and it will compare that username, okay, with the given username. Okay, username of the actual user and username present inside the token. If it is matching and at expiration time, or that token is not expired, that means it is valid token. Okay, so this is our JWT util class. Now let's see the next thing what we need to create. We need to create that auth controller. Okay, auth controller. Okay, so let's write that auth controller. Okay, so let's create that authentication controller. So for that new class authentication controller. Okay, and then so I already created this. Okay, to save the time, let me change the name. Okay, okay, so we have authentication controller. So which controller is this controller here. Okay, this controller. So what is the first step of the authentication controller? To call that authentication manager. Okay, authentication manager. So first let's go step by step. Okay, let's go step by step. Let me import this. See here. Okay, so see here. Basically this is authentication controller which has one API called as a slash authenticate, and it needs one request body. Okay, request body, and that body should contain authentication request. Okay, authentication request means basically that username password, that two things required only. So I haven't created this, so let me create this. So for this what we can do, create a new package called as model. Okay, inside this create a new class called as a authentication class. Okay, so I already created public, that's it. Okay, so I have that request body class in which we have username password. Okay, let me take it here, username password and getter setters, that's it. Okay, that's it. Now come to the here and import here. Okay, that's it. Now here we are good. So what we did here, we have created one REST controller which has one API called as authenticate, and which has one the request body, authenticate request. Okay, request body. So user has to call this authenticate API with username password. Once he receives that authentication request, then what is the second step that we have to perform here? Let me show you. That second step is we have to call authentication manager. Okay, let me show you. Second step, sorry, first step is authentication, call to the authentication manager. So let's create, or let's auto wire authentication manager. So here I have already auto wired the authentication manager, and then bean we need to create inside the configuration class. So we'll create it later. Okay, let's complete this code first. So let's auto wire this authentication manager, and then authentication manager dot authenticate, and then pass that new user password authentication token. Okay, in which we have to pass auth request, get username and password. Basically we have to pass here username and password. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are calling to the authentication manager authenticate method, and inside that method we are passing one authentication object. Okay, basically it's a username password authentication token. So we can see that it's an authentication object. Okay, inside that object we are passing username and password, right? Now the next thing is that authentication manager is responsible for to call whom, to call database. Okay, to call database. Okay, but he will not call directly to the database. For this we have to provide the implementation to the user detail service. Okay, user, because authentication manager knows only user detail service interface, so he will auto wire user detail service dot load by username. That's it. Okay, so let's do that thing. Okay, let's do that thing. So here we need to create one user detail service which is responsible for to get the data from the database. Okay, so let's do that thing. Let's write that user detail service implementation. Okay, so for that what we can do here, we have the user service pack, sorry, service package. So create new service class called, let's say, my user detail service, my or user detail service IMPL. user detail or my user detail. Okay, my user details. Okay, detail, that's it. And after this, what we can do, we have to implement, we have to provide the implementation from the that user detail service. Okay, user detail service, that's it. And let's change the name, that's it. Okay, now override the method. Now here we have override the method, and this method will get called by the authentication manager to get the user detail object. Let me show you in diagram. So this is the user detail service. Authentication manager call this method and get the that user detail object. So let's come to the point again. And here what we can do, create, okay, write a logic. Why it is giving the error? Let me check. Okay, okay, that's it. Now what is the next here? The next thing is we have to provide here implementation to get the data from the database. So for this we have to create a entity class. So let's create a entity class. Okay, so for this create a new package called as entity, that's it. And inside this entity package create one, okay, create one class, sorry, entity. Okay, right click entity, let's say my user entity. Okay, my user entity, that's it. Finish. And here provide at the rate entity. Now the one things that I miss, for database connectivity you have to provide here dependencies. What dependencies? That Spring Data JPA, and I am currently using the PostgreSQL, so you have to use whatever that you want. Like if you are using the MySQL, then you can use here MySQL dependency. Okay, currently I am using the Postgres, so you have to use same. So I have added this two dependency additionally. After this, in application.properties, you need to add these properties which we added already. That's it. So now the thing is key, I have created here entity. Now let's create here entity called as a my user entity, and here I already copied to save the time. Okay, so in that case, let me import these annotations. That's it. Okay, so let me show you this. So this is the entity, and this will be the data table structure in which username, password, and roles. So these three things will be there. And here the role will be comma separated because one user can have multiple roles. We can create here two tables like user which have multiple roles, but to minimize the complexity, I have created or I have taken here only single string, comma separate string. Okay, so that is the thing. Now this table will get created into database. Okay, now see the next thing. Okay, so we have my user. Okay, after this we have to create that repository. Okay, repository. So let's create that repository. For this we have to create one package called as repository. Okay, that's it. And inside here create the repository. Okay, so interface, so I already copied that stuff. Okay, my repository name called as a my user repository. Okay, and it should have one method called as find by username. Okay, find by username. Let me import the things. Okay, now we are good here. So let me show you again. This is our repository. Now the next thing is come to the that service class. Okay, my user details service. Now here we have to write a logic to get the data from the database. So for that, what we have to do here, first at the rate autowire, sorry, autowire, and that here we have to write. Okay, we have to autowire that my user repository. Okay, my user repository. That's it. Now from that my user repository, we have to call Let me close this unwanted thing. Okay, so here we have to call find by username. Okay, find by username, find by username. That's it, and pass this username. Once we pass this, then we will get the data. Okay, we will get the data. What is the problem here? Find by user name. Okay, let me check. String, let me check what is happening here. Okay, it is perfect, no issues. Okay, oh sorry, here string. Okay, and here we are passing this, sorry, we are passing something wrong. Okay, we have to pass here username. That's it. Now we are getting the data. For that username we are getting the data, okay, or record from the table. Now what is the next thing? Let me tell you. Okay, so dot get. So here we are getting that my user object. That's it. Now the next thing is we have to create that user detail object. User detail object. So for this we have my user object already. So create user detail object. Okay, so how to create this? Let me show you. We have to create that user object. So for this user, okay, let's import this user. Okay, which should coming from okay spring framework, spring security dot build. Okay, dot builder dot set username. So from where we will get that username? My user. Okay, my user dot get username, then dot set or dot password. So where we will get that password? From that my user dot get password. Okay, so after this what we needed? Dot roles. Okay, roles. And here what we needed? We need a roles. So where we will get the node roles? From the my user. But what is the thing here? Because it is returning the string, comma separated strings, and this needs a list. Okay, list. So what we can do here? Dot split. Okay, dot split by comma. Okay, by comma, and after this what we can do here? Okay, okay, that is fine. So we are getting the roles. Okay, roles. So whatever the roles are there in comma separated, so we are splitting it and we are providing to the roles. So after this what we have to do next? We have to create a user detail object. So for that what we can do? Dot there is a method called as a build. When we call this build, then it creates a user detail object and return this. That's it. Now we are good here. So we are good here. So what happened here? Whenever that authentication manager called that load user by username, okay, then he will get that user detail object which contains username, password, and role. That's it. Now what is the next thing? Let me show you. Let me show into the diagram. Okay, so this step is completed. Now user detail object returning the user detail. Sorry, user detail service returning the user detail object. Now what is next? Now authentication manager will call to the authentication provider and it return or it validate that objects or that credentials. If it is valid, then it is fine. Okay, so let's come to the again authentication controller where it is, where our authentication controller. So this is our authentication controller. So which step we have completed here? This first step is completed, calling to the authentication manager. Okay, now let me show you. So we have called here authentication manager, you can see. So we don't need this. Okay, so remove this. That's it. So what we did here, we auto-wire authentication manager and we call to the authentication manager dot authenticate method. Inside that we have passed the username. Okay, username. and internally it is responsible for to call that database. Okay, that's it, that user detail service. So our first step is done, and if we get that username or user object from the database, okay, for that username, then that means that username is valid, otherwise it will throw an exception. Okay, it will throw an exception. Which one, who's this step? Okay, if authentication manager call to the user detail service and that username is not find he not found inside the database, then it will throw an exception, that user not found exception. That's it. Okay, that's it. Then what will be the next? Let me show you. Okay, so the next step is calling to the JWT util for generate the token. Okay, you can see here the next step is calling to the calling to the or calling to the JWT util class to validate the token. Sorry, to generate the token. Okay, basically to generate the token. So let's see what we did here. First, okay, what we did here, let me show. Okay, so JWT util dot generate token dot generate token, and we are passing because that generate token method needs a username. I have already shown you this is a generate token method and it needs username. Okay, so we are passing here username, and from where we are getting this username, from that user detail service. Okay, which we already created. So again, what we did here, we call to the database and we getting that. Okay, we are getting this user detail. That's it. And from the user data, we are getting the username, and we are passing this to JWT util, and that util is returning the token. It is returning the token. So once that validation is successful, it will return the token, and that will get that token will get to the end user, to the client. So our flow is completed. Okay, half flow is completed. So which flow we have completed? User has to call authenticate API. That it will goes to the controller, and then authentication controller perform first step called as calling to the authentication manager. Manager is responsible for to get to get the details from the database and provide to the that DAO authentication provider, and then after this it validates. If it is valid, then it calls to the JWT util token generation class, and this class is responsible for to generate the token, and that token will get returned to the end user. So due to this we will get the that token. Okay, that user, basically user will get the token. Okay, now so then what is the next? Okay, what is the next thing? What is the pending? So the next thing is we have to create here JWT filter. Okay, JWT filter. So let's create a JWT filter. So basically that is implemented from the one filter interface, okay, which is given by the Spring Security. So let's create here filter. Okay, so for that where we can create, so let's create inside the config. Okay, class, let's say JWT filter. That's it. Let me change the name. So here again I have copied the code. Okay, the reason behind is to save the time. Okay, to save the time. That's it. Now you can see this is a JWT request filter. Okay, so this filter required when the user will call to the secured API with the token. So that time we need this JWT filter. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so what we have, JWT request filter extends from once per request filter. It is coming from the security. Okay, Spring Security. So don't worry about this. Just you have to extend it from the once per security filter. That's it. Another thing is you have to auto-wire here user detail service, which we created already. Next thing is we have to auto-wire here util class, which is responsible for to validate and generating the token. Okay, token. That's it. Now the next thing is we have to override this method do filter internal. Okay, because it is present inside the that filter. Okay, parent filter. That's it, and it accept these things: HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, and filter chain. Okay, basically these things it is accepting. So this is the request which is coming from the user. Now what will happen the next thing? Okay, so first user will send the request, okay, with the headers, and that headers will contain authorization. Okay, that header name is authorization, and value is a token which we already provided to them. Now it get the, so from the request it get the headers, from the headers it get the authorization headers. Now the next thing is, once you get the authorization header, what will be the next? It will check that authorization header is not null. Okay, that is fine. If it is not null, and it start with the bearer, so basically that authorization to that token should start with the bearer. Okay, there will be a bearer string, that's it. Okay, so these are some standard. Okay, so we will discuss it later in next videos, but right now it will check that token is started with the bearer or not. If it is started with bearer, then what it will do, it will get the JWT. Okay, it will substring. Why it is making substring? Because 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Okay, got it. So after the part of bearer, it is getting using the substring. That means it's purely JWT token. This is, once it get the JWT token, then it will extract the username from the that JWT util. Okay, sorry, it will extract the username using the util class. So as you know, we have that JWT util class which we already created. Inside there is a method called as a extract username. So he's passing this string, JWT string, to the method, and we are getting the username. Once we get the username, the next thing is, okay, the next thing is, here it is again checking that username not equal to null or not. Okay, if it is not null, then that is okay. Then the next thing is security context holder. Okay, security context holder. So it is checking this should not be in the security context. Okay, this should not be in the security context. Now the next thing is uh, user detail. Okay, and here again we are calling that user detail service to get that user detail object. Okay, to get that user detail object. So once we are getting that user detail object from the database, after this what we are going to do, we are going to validating the token. Okay, so as we know, we have JWT util class. Inside that there is one method called as a validate token, and for that validate token it needs JWT token and username. So based on username and based on the token, it is validating that token. So if it is true, if it is true, then it will go inside the, so if it is true, then it will get inside this condition, inside its condition, and it create one JWT authentication token object. Okay, and inside that object we are storing user detail. Let me show you. We are storing again that user detail, and that user detail dot get authorities, basically that roles. Okay, roles. So that means this is just an object where we are storing the details. Okay, user details, that's it. And again this JWT authentication object we are storing inside the context. Okay, inside the security context holder, that's it. You can see this. So where this step happen, let me show you in diagram. So here, okay, so what I was saying, ki JWT filter first pass this token to the util class. Util class, if util class saying it is true, okay, if it is true or if it is valid, then it is creating the, or it is creating the JWTA object, and it is setting this object inside the security context. So same thing is happening here. Okay, it creates this object and it is setting this object inside the context. Okay, security context holder, that's it. Okay, that's it. Now if you see here, this step is completed. Okay, this last step is completed. Now after this what happened, again it is calling chain dot do filter and request and response, that's it. Okay, the flow is completed. Now one another thing is, it is giving the error because it's a custom object. We have to create this class. So let me create this class, okay, to remove this error. Let me create this object, so where we can create, let's create inside the config. Okay, so this is also I copied, okay, to save the time. Let me change the name. Okay, that's it. So basically this is JWT authentication token object where we store that user detail and that token. Okay, so as per shown in the diagram, we are doing the our code. Okay, so we store this things that JWT authentication object inside the context. That's it. Okay, so let's come to the filter. Okay, so we are here right now. Now that token is validated and that object is created, authentication object token, and it is stored into the context. That's it. And after this, it is allowing to access the particular resource. That's it. Okay, in that way it is working. Okay, let's run the application and let's see what will happen. But before running the application, we need another thing called as a data. In database, we don't have that username, password, and that rules. So for that, what we can do, let me tell you. Okay, let me tell you what we can do. And this component is responsible for to store the data inside the database. Okay, so what kind of data? Let me remove this. Let me explain this. Okay. Okay, so basically this is just a component called a data loader. Here what we are doing here, we are saving the some users, right? Because to access the API we should have some valid users. Okay, so for that we have created here my user is equal to new my user, username, password, encoded password, then role. Okay, role, then these things. Okay, these things that we needed. That's it. Okay, that's it. Up. Now apart from these things, the main thing is pending called as a security config. So let's create a security config now. Okay, so here provide annotation called as a configuration. Okay, and the next thing is let's create that. So here also I have already copied the code, so let me paste here. Okay, that's it. Okay, that's it. Let me explain. So this is the main class called as security config. Here we have to provide some configurations. So first thing is the main thing called as a security filter chain. Okay, so as we discussed inside the diagram, okay, there is a security filter chain. So let's configure that security filter chain here. Okay, so here what we did, uh, this is the method inside this, that request will get intercepted, that HTTP request will get intercepted here. After this http.csrf, and we are disabling that csrf. So we will discuss about csrf later. Right now it's something security like attack or hacking related things. Okay, but right now skip it, it should be disabled. After this authorize HTTP request. Okay, and here what we are doing, request matcher. Okay, authorize request and request matcher permit all. So what is the meaning of this? The meaning of this key, that slash authenticate request not needed any authentication, so it is permit all, it has all the permissions, so anyone can call this authenticate slash authenticate URL. That's it. Apart from this, any request should be authenticated. Apart from this, any URL should be authenticated. That's it. And here session management is equal to stateless. Okay, basically we are what we are doing here, we are disabling this session management or sessions. So in last video we have seen that session or database level security, and where we created, not we created, but that Spring Security is creating the session per user. So if there are 10 lakh sessions, so 10 lakh users, then there will be 10 lakh session object will get created inside the server. Okay, or our in our application, and it's not possible to maintain this much of objects. So that's why that JWT comes into the picture, and here we are calling, or we are asking to the Spring Security or that Spring filter chain key disabled this session. Okay, that session create session policy, that means session will not get created. So after this we are adding the filter. Which filter we are adding here? JWT request filter. Okay, JWT request filter. That's it. Okay, and the type, okay, the parent basically. That's it. So we are adding here filter. So let me show you this thing in the diagram. So I already told you ki Spring Security filter is responsible for to call JWT filter for token validation, and same things we are doing here. We are adding this JWT filter. Okay, so we auto wired this JWT filter here, After auto wiring, we are providing this here. That's it. Okay, so this is all about our security filter chain. Okay, now the next thing is authentication manager. So we have to create authentication manager bean. Okay, so simply what we did, authentication manager, then authentication configuration. Okay, and by using that authentication configurations, we are creating the authentication, sorry, we are configuring or we are creating the authentication manager. That's it. Okay, so this is bean of authentication manager. That's it. Now the next thing is we are good with the this Spring Security config, and make sure you have this annotation. Okay, enables web security and added configuration. That's it. And the last thing which is pending called as a version of our Spring Boot application. So let me show. So we are using the 3.3.2 Spring Boot application. Okay, so it's a latest version of Spring Boot. That's it. Okay, now let's start the application. So here it is giving one error. Okay, so what is the error? So it is showing something. Okay, so it's giving the error. So let me correct the things. So where our util class. Okay, so this is JWT util class. Okay, so what we can do, increase the size of key. It is asking to increase the size of key. Okay, that's it. Let me try. Will it work or not? Now you can see that project is, now you can see the application is running. Okay, application is running. So now what we can do here, let's hit the API. So I have already created one API. So let me show you my user. Okay, uh, okay, so this is the API hello admin which I have created. So let me hit that API. But to hit that API, I need a token. I need a token. So for this, what we can do, we have to call that API. Which one? Authentication API. So where it is? Authentication controller. Where? Okay, so this is authentication controller. We have to call this API. Okay, so let's call this API. Okay, so this is the API, and here we have to provide a username, password. So username is user, and password is password. Password is a password. So let me show you this thing in the code. You can see here we have created one user uh, name called as user and password. That's it. So this is the user. Now let's hit. You can see we are getting the token. So let's copy this token. Okay, copy this token. Now I want to hit the API called as slash hello admin, right? Let me check where it is. Controller. Actually, there are a lot of classes. Okay, so see, I want to call this hello admin. Now let's open the. So let me copy this token first, and let's open the new HTTP request or make it get. Okay, hello admin, and remove this. We don't need this. Okay, let, so first hit this API without token. So you can see it's giving the error. It is not ever allowing to access. Now, the next thing is use here token. So authorization. Okay, so we are adding that token inside the header. Authorization. Okay, authorization, and here bearer. Okay, bearer, bearer, and paste that token, and let's hit. I can see we can able to access the that API with the token. So let me remove the token and let's try. Now I can see it is giving the error, and let's add the token and let's hit. And I can see we can able to access this. So in that way that token is working. Now here another thing is pending called as a authorization. So if you want to provide the authorization, for example, we have hello admin, and this API should accessible only with the admin user, because we already saved the data inside the database or user inside the database by using the data loader, where there are what happened here. Okay, so where there are two users that we have added into the database. Which one? First is the admin, password is a password, and the role is a admin. Similarly, another user, password, and role is a user. So we have two users and we have two APIs. Okay, and that two user have a role admin and user. Now let's say I want to provide here authorization for this hello admin. So what we can do, it's very simple. Go to the security config, and here what we can do, request matcher. So you can see this is security filter chain. Okay, so inside that security filter chain, uh, below that request matcher, create another new request matcher dot request matcher, and here provide the URL. Okay, URL. So let's slash hello admin. Okay, that is URL, and dot has role, has role. So which role it should have? It should have only, it should be accessible only by the admin. That's it, by the admin. Okay, that's it. It should be accessible by the admin. Now let's restart the application. Now what we can do first, let's log in with the user. Okay, let's log in with the user or get the token using the user. Okay, so we are calling authenticate API with the username and password. Okay, user is a user, password is password. Let's say, so let's hit here. Now we get the token. So copy this token. Okay, and now hit the admin API. Okay, hit the admin API. So let me open this. Now this is the hello admin API, and hit this API with that token. Okay, so let me paste here the token which we created, which we get for the user. Okay, user admin, user role. Now you can see it is giving the error. That means by using that any other token, okay, any other user's token, it will not work. So in that case, we have to log in or we have to get a token using the admin user, okay, with the admin role. So let's use that admin role. Okay, here admin, password is password. It should be in small. Password is the password, and let's hit. Now we are getting this token, and this token is for admin. This token is for the admin. Okay, now let's see that hello admin can be accessible or not. So provide here. Okay, so paste that token. That's it, and let's hit. I can see hello admin. That means that authorization is working perfectly. Okay, so let me revise these things. What we did here, we just added a new request matcher, and where we provide the URL and that role. Okay, so if you want to add many multiple URLs or APIs or the roles, then you can add this. So that's it. This is all about the authorization, and this is all about this video. So if you like, so please share and subscribe to my channel, and please add the comment, so I will get motivation and I will create a new videos for you. So thanks for watching the video.